our next question is from a listener named Pat, and they say, some of your previous podcast episodes, as well as the book, refer to a lot to different research, but some of that research contradicts the things that I've been taught growing up. How do I go about researching and finding the ultimate truth? And how do I know who to trust when they refer to research?
Phenomenal question.
Mm-hmm.
That is a great question. And thank you, Pat, for submitting that. It's a ongoing process. There's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's this learning curve that when you first start learning something, you feel like you don't know anything about it. And then you learn more about it and you feel like you know everything in the world about it. You're confident in it. No. This is how this is done because I read this thing and this is what this is saying. So this is it. And then you learn more and you go back into the stage of, oh my gosh, I didn't know anything about that. And then you kind of fall in the middle of like, okay, I have a good foundation, good fundamentals of this, but there's still a lot more to learn. And I cannot express the amount of times that that's happened in my career so far. And I hope that it continues to keep happening because then that means that we've grown.
Mm-hmm.
I hope 20 years from now, we're still doing the podcast and we can listen back to it and be like, oh man, things have really changed because the research that we had then is not what the research we have now. So these things have changed. They've evolved. They've adapted. Like that's beautiful. And we want that to happen. Quick example I can share. And for me, it was really the transition from my undergrad education to my graduate level education. Because undergrad, it's still pretty straightforward.
Mm.
You're starting to dabble that there's two sides to each story, but they're presenting you that the research shows 70% of the time this is what's happening. They're not sharing the 30% of the time that it's happening. I left undergrad going, I know exactly how a muscle contracts. I have this down. The signal comes in, calcium's released, it goes down the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it uncovers the binding sites, the actin forms with the myosin, troponin leaves, they form a cross bridge, there's a power stroke, muscle contraction happens. And I'm like, I can tell everyone in the world how their muscles contract. I got the science down. And then I got to grad school and we're learning it. And then I went to continuing ed after grad school. And they go, yeah, that stuff happens. But there's a satellite cell that actually kicks off that entire cascade. Mm-hmm. And that satellite cell is a glial cell. And that cell in the nervous system talks to this cell. So then this creates this and this feedback loop. And I'm like, wait a minute. I knew how a muscle contracted and now I don't know how it contracted because there's these other steps to it. So I've been through that Dunning-Kruger effect so many different times and it's good. So how do you know what is the truth? How do you lean towards the right research? I spent a lot of time reading not the right research. And what I mean by that is I wasn't going to the direct source. Mm-hmm. We learn from people, which is a phenomenal thing. But when we just take that advice and we don't take it to the next step, we don't know if that's the truth or not the truth. Not saying that we need to question everything that everybody says at every point, but if this statement is said, I want to see the story behind that. Like what led to that conclusion or to that statement. Mm-hmm. So for a long time when I was practicing as an assistant, I just believed things at face value. I believed that this ultrasound was healing this person's foot. I believe that every person needed electrical stimulation. I believe that every person would benefit from SI joint manipulations. I believed all these things and I never questioned it. And I got to grad school and the professors did a beautiful job at presenting all sides of the story. Mm-hmm. Here's what's not happening. Here's what is happening. Here's what actual research looks like. And we've kind of mentioned this before, but a lot of people will say, I've done research on this topic and I'm excited because they took control. They went and they found sources, they read through them. And then I asked them, well, where did you get this research from? Because I want to be there with you. I want to learn it with you. And most times it ends up being a blog or a case study. And I remember this happened during COVID and we won't go too much into that. But this person said that this drug will prevent and cure COVID. And I remember one of my mom's friends sending it over and my mom being like pretty excited about it. And I'm like, well, let me dive into that because great. Like, why is this not national, worldwide news? And ended up being that this research was from this one physician's office in which he ran one case study. None of it was blinded, meaning he knew exactly what was happening. He published it on his own blog, but the general population thought that this was credible scientific research. So what is science? Science is trying to discover naturally what is happening. So in order to do that, we have to remove our biases. So when we're looking at evidence, yes, expert opinion is a valuable source of it, but we need more than that. We need to look at peer-reviewed journals in which different types of environmental factors and things were tried to be controlled, so then we can see that outcome. So it tends to be looking at double-blinded, randomized control trials. Those tend to be the top to compare one thing versus the other thing. Correlation studies are difficult because you can find a correlation between everything. And then I learned in research too that the way that the researchers set up their statistical methods will help to show an effect or not an effect. And things published in journals may not always be the truth because the journal also has an agenda of making money. So they might push one thing versus the other thing. So things that we think is credible, the American Medical Association, I won't name other ones so we don't get in trouble, but a lot of these things, they're pushing agendas to make this thing seem like the truth. So you have to go to the direct source of it. If someone is saying, this study is showing this, go and read that direct paper. For me, I love going to journals from overseas. British Journal of Sports Medicine, Scandinavian Journal of Sports Medicine, because they're so far ahead of where we're at. They're doing placebo surgeries and showing the outcomes are the same. They're doing open intervention saline injections versus these other things I would say like PRP and all these other injections and showing the same effect because now they're looking at the placebos and the mindset with these things. So, and it's randomized into you're either getting this intervention or not this intervention, but the provider doesn't know which intervention they're giving, so they can't educate you on one way or the other. And the patient doesn't know what they're getting. And then the person reviewing the results, they don't know who got what until the final look through of it. So that lets us know that the outcome wasn't influenced by the education. It wasn't influenced by the provider saying, this is going to be the thing that fixes your knee. Let's inject it in there. Like they took all those variables out. So then that becomes good research for us to really put our trust in. So get both sides of the story. If one is claiming this thing, let's find research that is showing the other side of it. And then let's keep gathering this data until we find what the answer is. As you start doing that, you start to, or maybe this is just as me because I'm kind of a nerd, but you start to develop trust in the researcher themselves. So for me, Aaliyah Crum, the Mind Body Institute at Stanford University, she's put out really credible research time after time after time after time. So now when I'm looking for stuff on that area of research, placebo-based mindset, I'm looking for her research because I know that it's been done in a credible way.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I know for me, there's times where I'm like, I'm not going to research because I just trust you. And I trust that you're going to research and then just tell me, which is helpful. But I think there's also something to be said. I agree with everything you said, but I also think that there's almost like a natural instinct that we take for granted, but that we don't even know that we have because we've been fed so much information after like our entire life we're just constantly getting information, and we don't want to discredit the advice or the wisdom that your parents or mentors or teachers ever gave you, because I'm sure that they were giving it with the best intention. But I do believe that there are times where we get in the way of truth because we don't know. And so I think as you're diving into research and Pat, it really seems like you want to dive into research and understand it in a greater way. As you're doing that, remain open-minded that your natural instincts will often share the truth as well. You know, if you're being told, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but like if you're finding research where it's like bad, like, you know, about like your body, say your body's bad, like, no, your body is good. So how can you naturally believe that as you're going into research? And that's a very basic example, but I think you can elaborate a little bit more on the like you naturally knowing because you are like in tune with truth, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always evolving. And quick story that I'll share is that we used to think pain was this gate control theory, and the people that developed it, I'm blanking on the name right now, but uh, it was 30 years later. And the researcher that developed the gate control theory of pain, and not just him, but all the researchers before that that then led to this theory, they did more research and they found that their theory wasn't wrong, but it was lacking. There needed more information. So this researcher, where he could have just stayed retired, could have just rode off into the sunset, he instead published a paper saying more things have been developed. Please refresh yourself and read this article of the newer theories that have led to the further development of us understanding pain.
Yeah, wow.
Those are the mentors that you want.
Yeah.
The person, his whole life's work, Robert Welper is the name.
Okay.
Or no, Ronald Meslak is the name. So he spent his whole life in the lab looking at cells of the nervous system to develop this theory. To admit that your theory was not as great as you once thought it was, and that other things have been shown this other way, that's incredible.
That's humility.
Like, I think whatever prize can be given to that person, he's not after it for the prizes, but it should be given to him. Like that is amazing. So how do you ground yourself in the truth of it? It's difficult. It's so difficult because if this was a few years ago, I would say, well, if their p-value is showing significance, then you can trust that it's good. But now I've learned if they haven't calculated the pre-effect size and gone through all the rigors of what you need for research, that p-value may not be as significant as we once thought. And then it gets into the idea of like, well, who decided that 0.05 was of significance? Like, where does this number come from? So to get to the truth, you almost have to be that kid that's always asking, why? Why is that way? How come this happened? How did this happen? Because all of our number systems in science is based off of the Big Bang Theory. So now we have to have the idea that that actually happened. And if that actually happened, well, now we can calculate and have these numbers and the speed of light and all these things that science is, the number system is kind of based off of. So it gets hard to find that truth. But I think for me, what the truth is that I've continuously found in the research that I've done and the research that we continue to do is that it comes down to the truth is love. It's hard, but it's that simple.
Yeah.
All the research that we've seen, all the different outliers, all the different standard deviations, all the p-values, all the science, all these things that are being done, the truth is love. It doesn't matter the intervention. It doesn't matter the provider. It doesn't matter where it's being done. The thing that matters the most to create significance is that it is done from a place of love. And that's what all this, like, people think placebos are a bad thing. But the idea is that we're putting this thing into your body that's just sailing, so it doesn't actually have a physiological effect. But we're doing it because we care about you. And because that person is believing that they're being cared for, now the outcome is created. The truth, the foundation is love. Go to that foundation and then branch out from there. We talked previously about accountability partners. Have that person that can pull you out of the rabbit hole, because I've gone into deep rabbit holes of research, learned a lot of things that I didn't know. Last weekend, I went for a quick walk, came back, and I'm like, Brandy, guess what I just learned? And she's like, what? And I'm like, you know atoms? They're like the smallest particle of matter that we have. There's protons, neutrons, and electrons. And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, guess what? The protons and neutrons are made out of something else. And then those things are made out of something else. So what we thought was the smallest unit of matter is not the smallest unit of matter anymore. There's actually more to it. And started getting into the particle theory and quantum physics. And she's like, what were you doing on this walk? And I was like, I just want to know where dust goes. Like, things kick up in the air and you see it floating around. Where does it go? Like, there's not this dust mountain that we see. Like, we see garbage mountains, but we don't see dust mountains, unless the whole earth is dust, which it probably is. But
we are dust.
We are dust, but it's like, where does all this stuff go? So then that led to me learning more about protons and neutrons from quantum physics and through those theories. So you continue to ask questions, but know that the foundation and truth is love.
Yeah, it's so simple.
Yeah.
Love is hard,
Yeah.
but if you're, whether it's research, life in general, your work, your job, your hobbies, how you're raising your family, if you ground everything that you do in the truth of love and love completely, you're gonna have a great life. And you're gonna love and bless, and other people around you will have a great life because of it.
Yeah. Full circle, going back to the speech that the coach was giving with these incredible men at the graduation party. One of the things that stuck with me, and it's so common, it's said all the time, but love never fails. Because if it did fail, that wasn't truly love.
Yeah.
True love does not fail.